Hey, everybody. We're doing a hangout on paternity fraud. I have 6 questions, 6 discussion questions for us to discuss, and I have a definition of paternity fraud too. Should I just start with that? Karen Straughan is on with us.
I
You want to
I
say?
am, and just so you guys know, I got the notification in my email that this hangout was live. So,
So you know paternity fraud from the Red Pill movie, correct?
me, no, I've actually talked about paternity fraud a fair bit in the past, and it, just it was discussed in the Red Pill movie, but I mean, it's been a topic of conversation in the men's movements and the men's community for quite a while, and I'm really fond of the name paternity fraud because that's exactly what it is. It is a form of fraud, and especially since it's essentially convincing somebody to spend money or invest money in something under fraudulent circumstances by defrauding them. So it's very much it's a good way to state the problem. So.
Yeah, I have the definition. I just pulled a definition off of Wikipedia. Paternity fraud, also known as child identity fraud, and I think that's what you're talking about. There seems to be a bunch of names for it here. Misattributed paternity or paternity discrepancy is a type of fraud that occurs when a mother names a man to be the biological father of a child when she knows or suspects that he is not the biological father. And we see shows in America all the time with there's
Maury
like
Povich.
paternity. What's
Maury
that?
Maury Povich.
Yeah, yes,
Holy
yes.
shit, it was like 3 days a week out of 5 he was dealing with, oh, and the DNA test says you are not the father.
Maury Povich is the one. There's also a paternity fraud court now. I think there's actually another show that deals with the same thing. So I'm under the impression. Well, I looked up some numbers, and some people are saying as much as 20% of men are raising children that are not their own, which is there's no study to confirm that. I think the lowest number is 1 in 500 from a study that was done in the United Kingdom in 2008. The reason why I'm interested in this topic is because it's not really the fraud that I think is causing societal unrest. I think it's the uncertainty. And while the actual paternity fraud could be quite low, the uncertainty is still, I mean, quite high, could be quite high. Like
Well,
there are a number of things that I think this could be affecting. So I have some discussion questions. Go ahead, finish your thought, and I'll read the discussion questions, and we can move forward.
I do want to say that a lot of social norms surrounding marriage and fidelity and chastity, and sort of the stricter enforcement. I mean, there's always been plenty of enforcement of chastity for unmarried men and things like that in traditional societies. But the enforcement tends to be stricter, or the maybe not the penalties so much, but the prevention measures for
Right.
women to preserve their chastity, to marry as virgins, and to be faithful to their husbands. The prevention measures in terms of that were a lot stricter for women than for men historically, and the reason is because a woman always knows that the child that comes out of her body is her child genetically, and a man simply has no way to do that. And you can actually see this reflected because one of the big fields, areas of study in evolutionary psychology is kinship bonds and how strong they are and all of those things. And what you find is that maternal grandmothers are the most invested in their grandchildren because she knows her daughter is her own, and she knows her daughter's children are her daughters. And therefore, those grandchildren she knows 100% are her genetic progeny. And then you have a slightly less intense investment on the part of the maternal grandfather, although it's still more, he's still more invested in those grandchildren than the paternal grandmother, because the uncertainty of paternity are these children really my son's children, tempers and sort of mitigates her willingness to invest, right, in those
Yes.
grandchildren. So, and you even see in some studies they've shown that when a man's children physically resemble him, he will invest more heavily in them, or he will invest more heavily in the ones that do physically resemble him than the ones that do not.
Yeah,
Right?
and all the problem with paternity uncertainty. Well, all the studies in psychology show with attachment theory that attachment happens greatest in the first 2 years, and that's when paternity uncertainty is the most problematic for men. The first 2 years, the kid is not going to look like them potentially at all. So,
well, there is that. I mean, and you do find Gad Sad brought this up when I was talking with him in a hangout. He said one of the things that is sort of universal across cultures, and it happens over and over again. And when they set up this little experiment, right, and they have a woman in the hospital with a baby and a man who is not actually the father of the child. The parents of the woman have never met this man, right? And so they are able to switch the father out for somebody else, right? Some other man.
right.
And the parents of the mother of this child walk in, and one of the first things out of their mouths is he looks so much like his dad.
That's funny.
Yeah.
So let me read the discussion questions that I put together just to give people that are listening an idea of where we're going with this. I definitely am a huge fan of evolutionary psychology. I've read pretty much everything by David Buss. I don't know if you know him. One of the books that I'm always recommending to people is The Murder Next Door, which deals with a lot of this stuff. So the first question I have is, do they discuss paternity fraud in the red pill? The second question, how much attention does paternity fraud or paternity uncertainty or gender inequality get in the MRA movement? The third question is, from an evolutionary perspective, if practices like slut shaming and domestic violence, which is basically mate guarding, evolved to combat paternity uncertainty, could the widespread adoption of at-birth paternity testing reduce these societal problems? And these are problems that feminists are trying to solve. I don't know as much from the MRA point of view. The fourth question is, paternity fraud and paternity uncertainty disproportionately affect younger parents, unmarried couples, and those of lower socioeconomic status. Fatherless children is often cited as an issue in low-income and Black communities. Could a push for widespread at-birth paternity testing impact this societal problem as well? The fifth question is, men are commonly disadvantaged in family court. This is something the MRAs talk about all the time. There is a case to be made that this preference for maternal rights has something to do with maternity certainty, something you were just talking about. Could a push for widespread at-birth paternity testing impact this men's issue? And the last question is kind of an out there, but the whole history of humanity is a story of self-domestication. How do we take our self-domestication to its most peaceful resolution? And one of the reasons why I'm interested in at-birth paternity testing is because I feel like so many of the problems that people are discussing really come back to this paternity uncertainty issue. And I just, as a curious person, I wonder how much of society, of these problems, could be solved in society if we just, implemented a policy of at-birth paternity testing.
So the answers are yes.
No. Let's go with the first one.
Yeah.
I wanted our audience to know where we're going. So the first one we've already discussed a little. Do you want to discuss any more? The red pill and paternity uncertainty in the red pill, or paternity fraud?
Well, one of the things that the red pill did very well was it did separate the issue of paternity fraud from mistaken or misattributed paternity, right? So essentially,
paternity.
in one case, the woman knows full well that the child is not the child of the man she's saying, and And in other cases, she may be mistaken, or she may not know who is the father. She is the one who goes on to Maury Povich, and she's like, I'm sure it's this guy. I've been here 6 times, and I was equally sure it was the other 6 guys, but now I'm sure it's this guy, and no, he's not the father either. And so essentially, there's a mens rea component here that I think needs to be addressed, that some women are simply unsure. Other women know full well what they're doing, and they know that they're defrauding somebody. And what one of the things that didn't get brought up in the movie, and doesn't necessarily get brought up a whole lot, is that this isn't just defrauding a man of money, right? It's actually defrauding him of the opportunity to have his own genetic progeny, because he's not going to go out and have other kids if he already believes he has them, right? He already believes he's passed on his genes, so he's not going to be jumping at any kind of new opportunity to do that. And a lot of people are, a lot of feminists and traditionalists, biology isn't what makes a father, and, and biology isn't everything and all of that. Well, I would suggest that let's take a hypothetical situation. There's a woman, she goes to a fertility clinic. She has her eggs harvested, and has them in vitro fertilized and turned into embryos. And then she goes in later to have them implanted. And a nurse at the clinic intentionally implants her own embryos into that woman. Do you think that that woman who went to the trouble of having her own biological children, right? Do you think she has some reason to be upset when she discovers at age 45, when her children are in their 20s and one of them needs medical testing, a bone marrow transplant or something, and she goes in and gets tested and finds out these are not actually her kids, right? They are the kids of the nurse at the fertility clinic. Do you think she has a right to be upset? Do you think she has a right to feel betrayed by the process? Do you think that she has a right to some form of compensation? Do you think that she has a right to feel like she missed out, on the opportunity to pass on her own genes, right? Do you think that she has any right to be upset about this? This is the position that men are in when they discover that the 4 children that they had with their ex-wife, or the 5 children or the 6 children that they had with their ex-wife are not theirs, right? It broke up.
I think Karen,
the marriage. It broke up the marriage, and he's since moved on and remarried. But he's 45, and his new wife is 45, and it's over for him.
So the question is, Karen, if she realizes that the kids are not hers, then will the court force her to still be the mother, or she can just hand them away? Let's say she finds out like 6 months later. Right.
I'm sure she would be able to get some kind of compensation from the fertility clinic that allowed it to happen, but I don't know whether she would be. I don't know whether, like, every time I hear about something similar to this, right? Mm-hmm. The mother has not, babies switched at the hospital at birth. The mother has not wanted to disavow this child, right? The mother has not wanted to say, I wash my hands of this, because you form these bonds. And the movie, The Red Pill, expressed this very well in the case of one man who discovered, that his 5, blonde-headed boys were the children of the guy down the street. It's devastating to everybody, because this is a man who's been raising these kids. He loves his kids, right? He believed that they were his. He loves them as if they were his. He bonded with them as if they were his. And so it's devastating on a huge number of levels. And it just absolutely destroys the trust between the parents. And, so I don't know whether the law would allow a woman to disavow a child like that. But I do know that cases of these things happening to women are so incredibly rare. and that I've never heard of a woman who was in such a situation who has actually said, I want to disavow this child.
Maybe because of a low number of statistics. The hypothetical question I would ask is, and it's just a hypothetical, if this would be something very prevalent, that women would find out that their kids are not their own biological offspring, a few months after they, like, let's say, baby switching and stuff, would feminists be pushing for laws to allow women to be, released from?
Absolutely. Absolutely they would. Absolutely they would. I guarantee it. But they would also be pushing for laws that would allow those women to exert their de facto rights as mothers if they chose to do that. They would be fighting for for it to be the woman's choice to either disavow the child and walk away from responsibility to it, or to keep the child and maintain her maternal rights to it. That's what feminists would be fighting for.
So do you want to move on to question number 2? How much attention does paternity fraud or paternity uncertainty or gender inequality get in the MRA movement? For me, this is one of the biggest. Paternity uncertainty is one of the biggest gender inequalities from an evolutionary perspective. And I feel like a lot of the reason why men tend to be more violent or more competitive than women has to do with paternity uncertainty. We've evolved all of these tools that used to be at our disposal to battle paternity uncertainty, and the modern world has kind of taken those tools away from man, but women still don't really have the intuitions to understand this uncertainty that men face.
I would agree that paternity uncertainty is one of the reasons why men are more aggressive than women. But I would also say that paternity uncertainty is the level that we have, which is actually quite significant.
You think it's significant? Everything, I don't know that 0.2% is significant, but
no. Paternity uncertainty is enhanced by a particularly human innovation, biological innovation called cryptic ovulation. Cryptic ovulation, a lot of people believe that it evolved so that a woman can marry the pencil neck geek who's a good provider and then go out and bang the pool guy, right? Okay. And it's with him, but that's not when it evolved or how and why it evolved. How and why it evolved was essentially when women began to prefer male partners. This is back before we maybe even came down from the trees, and you see it in chimpanzees and you see it in baboons and stuff. When a female decides that she prefers the helpful, good father kind of male consort, a subordinate male who approaches her, attaches to her and her alone, shares his food with her, helps her with her offspring, and really favors her and pays special attention to her. And this is something that she does not get from the alpha male. And when she chooses to give him a reproductive opportunity, the only way to do that is when she's an estrus. That's when the alpha male is mate guarding. And she will have to go through a huge, big production, massive strategies in order to circumvent the mate guarding on the part of the alpha male, in order to sneak off and have sex with the nice guy that she actually wants to father her offspring or whatever. She wants to give him sex during that period. Cryptic ovulation actually evolved, I think, to facilitate those relationships, because for whatever reason, at that particular point in our evolution, the preference for those males who were not just the biggest thug on the block, but were actually ready and willing to invest, to share resources and all of those things, not just with the females, but with the offspring of those females. you have this, if that was the better way in the environment that we were in, cryptic ovulation would have facilitated those types of pairings. And
So are you saying one male, like they're using this to sneak away from the alpha male to mate with someone who might be better for the offspring? Is that what you're saying?
Yes. And that's how I believe, that's why I believe cryptic ovulation occurred, was to facilitate their ability to do that. Because if you're never in estrus, if you're never obviously visibly in estrus, your mate can't watch you and his 5 other
24/7. Yeah, exactly.
7, right? And but the cryptic ovulation actually increases the uncertainty of paternity. But uncertainty of paternity also, it causes certain forms of violence, or it drives certain forms of violence from males, but it actually pulls back other forms of violence from males, or other drivers of violence among males. So human males are much less violent, and particularly with each other, but especially with females, they're much less violent than chimpanzees are, because there is no going into estrus resulting in mate guarding and resulting in a male beating on the woman and beating the other guy into the dirt because he walked too close to her, right? There's none of that. All of that's eliminated, but it introduces a greater uncertainty. And one of the things that the greater uncertainty does, and this is one of the reasons why bonobo males are less aggressive and violent than chimpanzee males, is because everybody's having sex with everybody. And so everybody's offspring, right? All the offspring. I mean, there's something in the animal kingdom called competitive infanticide, and you even see this in stepfathers and the like being more likely to abuse children than biological fathers, right?
David Buss outlines that, looks at homicide statistics across the United States and outlines that in his book, The Murder Next Door. Yeah, there's pretty compelling evidence that goes on. Like stepchildren usually have a pretty rough go of it.
Yeah, and so you have this situation where competitive infanticide is essentially a strategy on the part of a male. And it's particularly striking in pure tournament communities where there's only one adult male in the mix, and so mountain gorillas and lions and things like that, where the new male comes in and immediately he kills off all of the existing juveniles and infants, and then within 3-4 days, all of the females go into estrus and he gets to impregnate him. And that's essentially, he's not going to waste his time while these females raise their offspring, their infants and their juveniles to a point of maturity where they go into estrus again. He may have been deposed by the next big badass on the block by then and missed his window altogether, right? So he's going to do whatever he can to impregnate these females as quickly as possible, and the way to do that is to kill off all their existing children, right? And you see this playing out in chimpanzee societies and baboon societies and things like that to a lesser degree. And in bonobo societies, because you never know, because you've had sex with almost all the females, you never know if that one particular offspring might actually be yours, right? And so it eliminates certain forms of violence or mitigates certain forms of violence from males. And it also, uncertainty of paternity also, because there is no estrus signaling among women, you don't get those massively violent confrontations between males during rutting season or whatever, because the mate guarding aspect of things is much more tempered, right? And then you're introducing things like sperm competition and warrior sperm and things like that to compensate for the fact that you can't mate guard all the time. So, it's kind of a mixed bag. I mean, some forms of violence are driven by it and some forms of violence are mitigated by it. So
I'm weary of bringing up the bonobo thing, the bonobo and the chimpanzee thing. First of all, because I believe that humans have had a ton of evolution between chimpanzees and bonobos. And also feminists constantly like to cite the bonobo thing as like this perfect matriarchy that exists in nature.
No.
Yeah, but the thing is, they've done, like, first of all, chimpanzees are worldwide. They're like, they've succeeded. Bonobos are in this one little place where the resources are very plentiful. Yeah,
they're
so
like in China. The only reason
the single mothers in the bonobo situation, just like, you could have a society of bonobos with all single mothers and it would be just fine because there's all this unlimited resources totally surrounding them.
Well, and because the separation between chimpanzees and bonobos occurred at when the Congo River formed, and if and when chimpanzees learn how to swim and stop being afraid of water, the bonobos are toast. They're dead. They're gone.
Exactly.
So the chimpanzees are like ISIS, and the bonobos are like Europe.
Well, yeah, I mean, you look at the rates of violence between chimpanzees and bonobos. You look at the rates of not just violence between in-group conspecifics, but violence between in-groups and out-groups. So warfare and even genocides and things that go on with chimpanzees that don't tend to go on with bonobos, right? And somehow, even with all this killing going on, right, there's much higher levels of violence and I guess chimpicide, can't say homicide, but going on, you have a much more successful overall and much more adaptive species. And they've done some studies that they claim indicate that bonobos are higher in intelligence, but when they actually went back and looked at the experiments, what they found was it wasn't that bonobos were more intelligent than chimpanzees. It was that chimpanzees were too busy looking at their neighbor's paper to really stay on task and concentrate and focus, because they're more competitive with each other, right, and they're more interested in outcompeting each other. And so that handicaps them a little bit in the performance of certain tasks. But when you actually look at the levels of technology that bonobos have achieved versus chimpanzees are way ahead in terms of actually building compound tools and things like that, and being able to cooperate in groups. And one of the most striking differences between humans and pretty much any other species is the level and extent to which human males, unrelated to each other, or even related to each other, can cooperate with each other. You find chimpanzee groups and bonobo groups that get up to about 150 individuals, and then the genetic bonds between the males become watered down enough that they no longer are willing to tolerate each other. And the forms of male-male cooperation that they are able to engage in, even with those strong kinship bonds, are extremely just superficial compared to the levels of cooperation that can be engaged in by human men, right? And so when you actually compare chimpanzees and bonobos, when you compare the males and how the males relate to each other, male chimpanzees will hang out together. They will hang out together and they will socially groom each other, and they will, just kind of be bros together, I guess, right? But bonobo males are completely isolated from each other. Males in bonobo society don't even do their own courting and choose their own mates. Their mothers do it for them, and their mothers do the courtship stuff for them, right? And these males are incapable of working together in terms of even just performing tasks within the group, cooperating to perform tasks within the group, let alone, really dealing with any kind of intrusive out-group matter like predators or another group, or if the chimpanzees learn how to swim, they will be completely unable to cope.
So if wow, I get a lot of, oh, it's you, Karen. Okay. So if we just build a bridge over that river, just to make a point to Sweden and feminists.
Oh yeah, no, it's absolutely, when you look at strong males who are able to cooperate with each other for a common purpose, right?
We're drifting off topic though. paternity fraud is the topic. So,
well,
It
okay,
will always be like this, but yeah, you're right.
but
I mean, we can beat up on Sweden if we want, but we're talking about paternity fraud.
But uncertainty of paternity, the way humans have done it, which is not that everybody's having sex with everybody else out in the open, but this sort of concealed ovulation, and you pair that with the social norms, and you also, because of this, humans, despite the existence of paternity fraud, humans actually there's less certainty on the part of any individual man because of that concealed ovulation, right? Than there would be among chimpanzees who can mate guard and bonobos who can also mate guard and all of this. But what happens is when the reproductive opportunities are distributed among all the males and or the majority of the males, it reduces that kind of competition that prevents males from cooperating with each other. It's more of a sharing of the resource of reproductivity among all of the males, and it reduces the tensions that would really, lead to violence, because one guy's hogging all the chicks and all these other guys are getting nothing, and all of those resentments that come in with that and everything else. So I think it's really a complex thing, and when you look at it in terms of all the ways it plays out and all of the things that are influenced by it, I don't know that you could say that uncertainty of paternity is a cause of violence, because in some ways it mitigates violence and removes drivers for violence. So
so violence for me is a product of limited resources, and those limited resources can be mate choices. I see in our, let's start talking about the most interesting, I think, of the animal kingdom, the humans. So, the violence that I see in men constantly is fighting over women. It seems like that seems to be a regular thing. I'm going to move on to question number 3, and it deals more with the society issues that I think we're dealing with. Number 3 is, so from an evolutionary perspective, if practices like slut shaming and domestic violence, which I think is mate guarding, Peach Bailey did a really good video on domestic violence, and I was watching it, and all the behaviors she was outlining in that video just screamed mate guarding to me. Like these really jealous guys that are worried about what their women are doing are mate guarding. For me, that's the human equivalent of mate guarding. So these evolved, and part of my thinking here is that they evolved to combat paternity uncertainty. These things are going on unconsciously, obviously. Like people men feel jealousy and paranoia. And if that jealousy and paranoia is good for their genes, then it's going to be passed on. If a guy who's jealous and paranoid has more grandkids than someone who isn't jealous and paranoid, then that emotion of jealousy and paranoia is going to be spread down. So I'm wondering, like, we've domesticated animals. Like if you set a pet loose in the wilderness, chances are it's not going to survive because we've taken the fight out of them. I'm wondering if we adopt widespread at-birth paternity testing, if that can reduce some of these social problems that, like, Peach Bailey is outlining in her video, and a lot of these domestic violence cases, I think, have a lot to do with this. I mean, I don't know why. My thinking is, I don't know, like a lot of domestic violence, I don't know that there's an evolutionary reason for that domestic violence other than paternity uncertainty.
Oh, I think paternity uncertainty has a lot to do with it. Absolutely, 100%. Jealous, the types of domestic violence that are motivated by jealousy are absolutely about uncertainty of paternity. And as far as, mandatory DNA testing at birth, do that for 100,000, maybe 200,000 years, and you'll see some results. Right?
Do you think it would take that long, though? Because We managed to domesticate animals in far less than that, I believe.
Well, but look at those animals, right?
They did an experiment. You know, the Russian experiment with the dogs, where they managed to domesticate the dogs in a few generations.
Absolutely, they did, but they actually had to, number one, okay, they had to selectively breed that, and the generational cycle for animals, domesticated animals,
That's a good point.
Is very, very brief, right? And we're not in, like, selectively breeding humans is eugenics, and we're not. I don't think anybody's.
Whoa, I'm not advocating selective breeding.
No, but that nobody's going to jump over that kind of cliff or hurdle or whatever you want to call it in order to advocate for what would have to end up being an adaptation to the new normal, which would be mandatory paternity testing.
Mandatory is such a nasty word. I think
routine maternity test, paternity testing at birth.
Yeah,
What?
How would we do that? Because I think doing it for the children, you could never say we're doing it for the guys, because that would be universally balked at. If we said we were doing it for the children, I think there's an argument to be made that every child should know who their biological father is, right?
I'm not arguing against routine paternity testing at birth. I actually think it would be a wonderful idea in terms of justice. And in terms of the men,
if it was a feminist issue, it would be happening tomorrow, right?
Absolutely, and I think it absolutely should. But I don't see the social problems that are generated by paternity uncertainty resolving. Okay, how many generations do you think that decoupling sex from childbirth, right?
The thing is, I understand what you're making an argument that the biology wouldn't catch up, but my argument is that it could catch up very, very quickly, because humans have this thing called culture. So man would immediately stop worrying about that consciously. I don't know if they'd stop worrying about it unconsciously.
Well, I don't, and given that if domestic violence is about paternity uncertainty, if that's the main driver, at least male domestic violence toward women, right, is the main driver for that, then it's an unconscious or a subconscious driver, right?
Correct. We are in agreement.
Right. So you're talking about, when people say, when I discuss behavior and how it's influenced by external incentives and disincentives and things like that, and people say, well, people would. I usually use people would respond, and they all of a sudden they wouldn't respond in this way, this chimpanzee kind of way. They would respond like rational people. Well, if we responded like rational people, then we would only want to have sex when we wanted kids, because the moment that we, at whatever point, whether it was 100,000 years ago or 1,000,000 years ago or 10,000 years ago, when we made the connection that it's actually sex that makes babies, right? We would have decided, okay, that we don't want sex, and not only would we decide that we don't want sex until we want children, but we would have no drive towards having sex. We would have no desire for sex. We would not feel any impulse towards sex until and unless we wanted to have a baby, right? And that is just not, and the pill, right, is not about controlling when we have babies. The pill is about allowing us to indulge our desire for sex, that despite us knowing, right, for 100,000 years or however long we've known that sex equals babies, right? We still want that, right? We still want to have sex.
The emotions are very much driving the machinery that is human beings.
Artificial means that, and those artificial means do not deal with our desire for sex. They haven't changed, and they will not change our desire for sex. They only change the outcome, right? And so when you look at something like the routine paternity testing at birth, it won't change the underlying drivers of the behavior.
Are you certain of that though? Because wouldn't women be changing immediately?
Sorry?
Wouldn't women be changing immediately? I mean, wouldn't they be forced to respond in kind? I mean, many women would never be in the situation of not knowing the paternity of their child, but a certain amount of women would, and you think they would have to respond immediately.
Oh, they would have to respond via their behavior. Yes.
Exactly.
Right. But the men wouldn't necessarily respond by hitting less or being less jealous. And that's really what this is. I mean, if you're saying that it's uncertainty of paternity that's driving these behaviors, which I think there's a very good argument to be made for that, women, even women changing their behavior and men having that sort of conscious, rational guarantee, right, that they're never going to be saddled with some other dude's kid, with the milkman's kids, right? Mm-hmm. Even despite that, you're not necessarily going to see a change in the sort of hormonal and genetic and all of the sort of the proximal drivers for that kind of behavior, right? That takes a long time to get weeded out, right? And it has to be selected against, right? And
yeah,
you can have a situation where with routine paternity testing at birth, a situation where it would be selected against, right? Because it would no longer be a genetic advantage to mate guard like that for a man, because, hey, the system's mate guarding for me and not holding me accountable for kids that aren't my own and the whole bit, right? But it would take a lot of generations for the population of men who are now more successful, the more relaxed, less mate guarding ones, to displace the ones carrying the genetic legacy. Right? I mean, you essentially have to have a population displacement.
No, I'm with you. I'm with you. It's an open question. We really can't know the answer to that question. My feeling is that the women would adjust their behavior immediately out of necessity.
Yes,
because women would not want to get in a situation where they were like, okay, well, I need to really, if we're going to do like when the kid's born, if they're going to have to do paternity testing on 5 guys, it's going to be an uncomfortable situation, right?
Oh yeah, no. And I mean, you even see this now with, I mean, one of the things that was not brought up in the documentary and that is rarely addressed is the fact that, okay, so you have some DNA labs that do nothing but DNA testing for medical purposes. So somebody does need the kid does need a transfusion or a bone marrow transplant or a kidney or something like that. And they test the immediate family first.
Oh, I know. This is how it always comes out.
Okay. And no, but here's the thing. In 80% of cases, it doesn't come out. The father is not informed that he is not the father.
Oh, I know. Yeah. Of course.
Specifically being tested for paternity, the lab has a policy of saying, well, we will not disclose that this guy isn't the father because that might, even though it's clear, given that he had his bone marrow fucking tested, right, that he thinks he's the father, right? He's laboring under a misconception that he's
they won't set it straight.
They won't set him straight because it would be a violation of the mother's privacy. It would be a violation of the child's privacy, and it would disrupt the family unit. And so essentially we have this system that is, I mean, and then they say, well, you don't have any hard and fast numbers on how many men are being duped into raising kids not their own. And it's, well, because nobody will even disclose when that's actually occurring.
Right. Yeah. They, 1 in 500, I think, is the 2008 study. My thing is,
I would actually suggest that Robert Sapolsky has it more on. He has a better handle on it in terms of having looked at multiple studies. And
right.
He said anywhere from 10 to 30%.
But regardless of the study, because if you make an analogy to terrorism, right, you're more likely to die, riding a bicycle than in a terrorist attack. Yet think how much terrorism affects people's behavior
Of course.
over these other things. That's why I'm just saying it would be something that could be one of the things that I dislike is in a lot of policy debates, people shoot for policies that are just wildly implausible. This doesn't seem totally implausible to me. It seems like something that could happen. Like it could happen tomorrow if people had the will to do it. I mean, it could happen tomorrow.
Absolutely. And I think too, you have to realize too, when the stakes are highest, and not even just survival stakes, but reproductive stakes. Because
that's when violence comes out. That's when crime comes out.
Survival is meaningless without passing on your genes. Doesn't matter how well you survive. You could live to a ripe old age. If you don't pass on your genes, you're a loser in the genetic lottery. You're a loser in the game of life, essentially, as far as the rules that evolution has set up, right?
Correct.
So when you look at the stakes for women, you know, and the extreme unlikelihood that a woman is ever gonna, and the fact that it's never really existed in the entirety of history, that a woman could give birth to a child that's not her own, right?
Right. And not only that, women have no intuition for this. I bring this up with feminists, and they're like, I've never even thought of that.
They have no sympathy for it either. But then you look at the stakes for a man, right? And you look at, say, going back to chimpanzees, right? Because they are, for good or bad, they are where we came from, or the common ancestors where we came from.
I do, but the cultural adaptation that we've grafted onto human beings, like we have institutions that kind of shape us. I mean, the latest I've seen and I read is 70% biology and 30% culture.
I wouldn't go so far as to actually even pin a number on it, because
it's tough. Yeah.
Certain cultures are stricter than others. Some cultures are more relaxed than others, and that will change the formula there in terms of how much is biology expressing and how much is culture expressing, right?
This is based on twin studies that came out around the turn of the century, around the 2000s. So they did studies of twins that were born and raised apart. So they're biologically identical and raised in two totally different families, and the biology just overpowered more than anything else. So this is another reason why you don't want to necessarily be raising another person's kids, because you know what you're getting into with your own temperament, right?
True. And when you look at too the stakes involved, right? So because for chimpanzee females, the difference between a successful one and an unsuccessful one is the difference between 6 offspring over her lifetime and 4 offspring over her lifetime. And that's a very, very marginal difference. And both of them have actually been a success, right? And it's very, very rare for a chimpanzee female to not pass on her genes at all, right? But then you look at the difference between success and failure for a chimpanzee male, and it's, this guy has 0 and this guy has 50, right? Yeah. And so the stakes themselves are extremely high in terms of the differentials between winners and losers, right? Yeah. So I think that you have to take into account that's going to inform the biological drives in terms of men wanting to ensure that their children are their own. And I don't think that feminists or even women in general have any clue whatsoever. I mean, I think that they could imagine, if they were watching a Lifetime movie, how it would feel to be tricked by that nurse at the
your analogy was great. That was perfect.
But I think that they would just be absolutely sobbing at the conflict
terrified.
of a woman who discovers when her kid is 16 and she's now in her 40s that this kid that she's been raising all this time, believing it's her own, is not her own, and it's too late for her to have her own child now. And look how hard she worked and tried. Having your eggs harvested is not a pleasant thing. right? And she went through all of that so she could have her own biological child, and she was cheated out of that, right? And I think every woman could connect with that woman in a Lifetime movie, right, about that woman and her but it's not like I don't love this child that I raised, and oh my God, the conflict and the torment and the angst and the drama, right? And there wouldn't be a dry fucking tissue in the house, right? It happens to men. It's like, why are you complaining? It's fatherhood is more than just biology.
The fictional scenario that you set up right now, you can Google, and there's half a dozen of these actual stories on YouTube where the guy found out because someone in the neighborhood told him. There's one story that's just heart-wrenching. The girl who was always thought that he wasn't her father wasn't her biological father.
Yeah.
And she finally got the nerve to approach him about this, and he had a paternity test done. They did the paternity test together. They found out he's not. Like, he went to tell his mom, she's not mine, right? And the mom said, I already know, because someone in town told her, and she snuck a paternity test.
Oh my God.
I know. So I mean, this scenario, I mean, these cases are like the terrorism thing. I really think it's best to think of it like that. Like, it's not 50%. I don't think it's 20%. Like, you laid it out that we can't know, and we obviously can't, because nobody's collecting proper statistics on this.
Yeah.
But with the terrorism thing, how much of this affects society? And I am totally sympathetic with what you're saying about it may take generations and generations. But if we did this tomorrow, it would solve this one problem immediately. Yes. And
Agreed.
maybe solve these others. It's hard to say. I mean, it could be 10 generations, like you're saying. It could be 5. I mean, the women would be forced to curb their behavior immediately. And I think this curbing behaviors, we once had a stronger religious sense. And I'm an atheist. I'm not a religious person, but I think religion did curb a lot of this type of behavior. You mentioned that early on in the stream.
Absolutely.
And I think that institution is gone.
Every single culture that has, or society that has ever achieved the status of a civilization, has given men some form of reassurance that his children are his own, right? And encouraged his investment, or enforced his investment in those children.
This is the domestication of men right here. This probably wouldn't have happened without it.
Yeah, and what we have, and at the end of every civilization, you get these sort of the new introduction of certain norms. Promiscuity is, oh, well, there's really no reason to you see it in Rome, you see it in Mesopotamia, you see it in Greece, you see it in all these sort of the traditions and the traditional ways of doing things that ensure this for men, that they can be relatively sure that their children are their own, and therefore they are willing to accept the social contract that they invest in those children, right?
Correct.
That is what is broken down and beginning to be torn down in the twilight of all of these civilizations, all of these empires, all of these societies, right? As they're about to fall. And then you have an external culture, whether it's the Gauls or the Vandals or whoever, right, at the gates, who are doing things in a more traditional way, who are going to come in and essentially displace you either by the sword or by the cradle, right? Mm-hmm. And yeah, I don't know if it's something we can stop.
Sorry, go ahead. Finish your thought.
I don't know if it's something that we can put a stop to, because it's happened so often before. Maybe it's just history.
We have the technology, Karen.
I know. We have the technology to achieve escape velocity, but do we have the political will? And do we? I
don't know. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to have this conversation, because nobody's even talking about this. Nobody's even talking about it. And I feel like so much of good public policy is defining the problem correctly. Like they constantly talk about jobs, jobs, jobs as a, I don't want to get too far off a foot here, but they talk about jobs. And one of the big things I think hindering our jobs is technology, but nobody's talking about technology. They're all talking about like factories are going to come back. Like this, I think.
Oh yeah, no, my boyfriend spends his days automating people out of their jobs. So
yeah, totally. So and this paternity fraud thing is the exact same thing. I look at what's going on in the family courts and I just think paternity fraud or paternity at birth, like society-wide at-birth paternity testing would solve that problem. That's what I think.
Well,
so many of these cases it would solve.
One of the things that people don't understand is that, I mean, red pillars and pickup artists and those kinds of people often use this kind of phrase, you know, men love women, women love children, children love puppies. Okay.
I've never heard that.
Okay. And that's sort of the hierarchy of love. And when you look at that and you look at the fact that men and children are connected, they're connected through the woman, right? And it is not the weakest bond because it can be extremely strong, but it is the most vulnerable bond, right? The most vulnerable to something like fraud, or the most vulnerable to something like uncertainty, or the most vulnerable. So all of our societies, all of our civilizations, our cultures that have really progressed have actually looked at the father-child bond. There's a reason why every civilization that's ever actually become a civilization has been based on patriarchy, right? And upon the man's claim to his own children. The woman's claim is the biological one. The man's claim is the legal one, right? The man's claim is the one that is supported by the legal and cultural norms. It's reinforced by them because it is seen as being the one that is the more vulnerable, right? And
that's interesting. I've never heard that.
A huge number of like a huge when you actually give a man children that are his, right? A huge proportion of the surplus labor in society that has allowed us to progress as we have, right, has been on the backs of men investing in their children, right? And like I said, something as simple as whether your kid resembles you or not means a differential in your willingness to invest, right, as a man, subconsciously, right? And so when you actually are able to guarantee that, yeah, men, these children are yours, you get a whole huge amount of surplus labor that these men are willing to put in to ensure that those children, especially, you don't see this necessarily from the Genghis Khans of the world with their 1,000 fucking offspring, right? You see it from the average Joes who only really get to have 2 or 3 or 4, and that's it, right?
Yeah.
And that's what civilizations are built on, are those guys. And so we're undermining everything.
Yeah, you get lower crime as well. This is actually a great segue to move on to the fourth question. So Obama talked about this a lot, the fatherless children in Black communities and low income communities. And I wonder, they're saying that the young parents, for obvious reasons, unmarried couples and those of lower socioeconomic status are the most vulnerable to this. And I think they're probably the ones that the most domestic violence is probably taking place in. I wonder if this widespread at-birth paternity testing could solve some of this fatherlessness in lower income and Black communities as well, because the fact that these shows are on that we've talked about makes me think that there's a lot of uncertainty out there in these communities, and you would just take this uncertainty off the table.
Okay, you would take the uncertainty off the table, but there's another thing that is missing from that, right? Because, okay, we have DNA testing and we can pin, you are the father, right? And now you get to pay child support, woo, right? And that's all you get is the responsibility. You don't get any of the reward. You don't get companionship from a woman. You don't get sex.
I just want to say one thing though. In the Maury Povich situation, a lot of times these babies are, 1 years old, 2 years old. In my scenario, we'd be getting that information at the hospital when the baby was born. And I
But
think that could change things,
well,
because the man would know, like the man goes through a year of telling himself, I'm not the kid's father. That's not my kid. That's not my kid. And human psychology relatively well. Once you've made up your mind, what we believe tends to drive what we perceive. So it's a huge U-turn in human psychology to go from telling yourself that's not my kid for a year or two to all of a sudden that's my kid. If you knew at the hospital day one, I think it could be a different scenario. What's your take on that?
I do think men would be willing to invest. I know that there are men out there who are extremely, like, they ended up with a kid through no choice of their own. They're young. They're just getting their lives started, right? And they ended up, through a one-night stand or whatever, or a very brief relationship, ending up being a father, and they want to take responsibility and they want to be involved, right? But on the flip side, you have to have a system that actually facilitates their involvement, right? Because if all you are treating that man as is an automatic teller, right, that just spits out cash, who has nothing, no right to have anything to do with his children. And this is one of the biggest inequalities in terms of yes, default mother custody, right? That is biologically facilitated. We know this kid came out of your body. We know this kid is yours, right? And we don't necessarily know that Joe Blow over there is the father of this kid, right? But once that's established in court, right, and he is forced to take responsibility for that child financially, that doesn't give him any rights, right? He has to separately apply, right? He has to either ask the woman and be voluntarily granted rights to that child, or he has to go to court and apply to a judge to give him some rights to that child. And she has every right, usually with legal aid in terms of these low-income communities and things like that. She has every right to oppose him every step of the way and make it as long and excruciating and expensive as possible for him to actually acquire these rights if he ever does, right? And so it's not going to be a simple solution, like solving the problem of fatherlessness. That is almost entirely in women's side of the court. Women have every power to solve this problem, and half of the problem is women refusing to let men be fathers, right? It's not necessarily, there are men who abandon and walk away from their responsibility and all of those things. But
is there statistics on that? Do you know which percentage is the men that walk away? I wonder sometimes if the paternity uncertainty is facilitating that walk away, because if the paternity uncertainty is a problem in the local environment, then men would often adapt a strategy to have sex with as many women as you could, because you're never going to know if they're your kids, but you want to attempt to, you figure some of them will be your kids, right?
Yeah, that's the bonobo thing, right?
Yeah, totally. But I think isn't this what's really going on in these communities?
Oh yeah, no, they're sort of transitioning towards that peaceful utopian matriarchy filled with female gang violence and all kinds of other lovely things. But essentially, what we need to, like, we can't just look at it as, we need to assign paternity and then the problems will be solved.
No,
right?
I don't. Yeah, obviously not. There are, you're saying there are other problems in family court that are
not just in family court. There are other problems socially, right? Like, when, I don't know if you've ever heard this or read about it or whatever, but I mean, it's sort of, it's one of those things that Thomas Sowell talks about, and other sort of
I've read Thomas Sowell
types and more conservative people. They talk about, like back in the 1960s, there were people knocking on doors, aggressively selling welfare to low-income families, and these were often intact families. But, okay, at the time when this started, nobody in the government and none of the voting, none of the electorate were prepared to give welfare to able-bodied, employable men, right? So if a woman wanted a welfare check, she had to boot her man out. If a man wanted his children, maybe he's underemployed or he's sporadically employed, right, doing his best, living in a marriage, in an intact family with his wife and his kids, right? If he wanted them to have a steady paycheck via welfare, he had to remove himself, right? And lots of women booted their men out, and lots of men voluntarily removed themselves in order to ensure that for their children, right? And when you have a system that provides the things that men would otherwise have to provide to women for no charge, they don't have to pick up his dirty socks. They don't have to have a meal on the table. They don't have to put up with him farting in bed. They don't have to deal with him being grumpy when he gets home from work or being out of work or whatever, right? Being late, being underfoot around the house when he's unemployed, right? They don't have to put up with any of that, right? And they get all of the same financial, all of the same resources that they would have gotten from him. They get that some other way. They get that from the government in the form of welfare, and they get that from involuntary payments that the state will take from that man and give to her, right? That's free money. All of that is free money, and she doesn't have to put up with any of his bullshit, right?
Yeah, the incentives are all wrong. I totally agree with everything you're saying.
Why would she compromise? Why would she settle for a man who's not perfect? Why would she, just to give her kids a father? And this is, again, where it comes into how so many of these decisions are subconscious, right? Because if she was thinking rationally, she would realize that even a not great dad in the home is better than no dad, at least in terms of her kids and how they're going to do. Right? She would know that because studies have shown it, that, even a subpar dad, if he's not abusive, right? He's going to do better for your kids than no dad at all, right? But women aren't thinking rationally. They are just responding subconsciously to the incentives and disincentives in place, right? That's what they're doing.
So you make a good segue to the fifth question. You're talking about the unconscious and how that drives a lot of human behavior. And I fully agree with that. I don't know if you've read Jonathan Haidt's book or David Sloan Wilson or any of the books that talk about really emotion is not really emotion, but it's really intuition, and it drives so much of our behavior. So much of our behavior is fixed by our gut level reaction to things, and we sort of post hoc reason our way to why we're doing things.
Yeah.
So I'm a firm believer in that intuition drives. I mean, obviously it can be overridden by rational thought, and people do that all the time. But most people, to get through the day, we're constantly being bombarded by all kinds of things. So we're lucky that we have this intuitive system running at all times.
Oh yeah, 90% of our decisions in a given day, 95% are intuitive.
So we're on the same page there. So men are commonly disadvantaged in family court, and this is a lot of what you're talking about here. My question is, how much of that is due to a preference for maternal rights, since maternal certainty has always been assured, and could a push for widespread at-birth paternity testing impact the family court thing, because judges and whatnot would be forced to shift their intuitions? I know you're going to say it's going to take millions of years. I'm not sure that I agree. There's two working theories in evolution, that things happen very quickly in a short period of time, and the theory that things happen over longer periods of time. So I think we could potentially see some of that take effect. Judges, I would say, are probably the most rational individuals that are in our society to move up to be a judge. So I think maybe this could affect their decision making in family courts if just paternity uncertainty wasn't a thing.
Well, I would hope that it would, but there again, you know,
do you think there are judges out there that are looking at the case and going, well, I don't even know if that guy's really the biological father?
No, I don't think that that's what's affecting them. What's affecting the judges is the woman's higher level of neoteny. The women are wonderful effect. The sort of the
but how much of that is because we know they're the paternity, they're like have maternity certainty.
It doesn't matter why we have these, you know, what happened, what was going on 200 or 1,000 years ago or 1,000,000 years ago that led us to have these types of responses to those kinds of things, right? Again, I think that it may impact judges' decisions to a certain extent, but I don't think we're ever going to eliminate the, you know, like even when you look at, and I'm gonna use an example that I used in one of my videos ages and ages ago is sort of the our perceptions of what gendered perceptions of what are sexually receptive behaviors and what are sexually proceptive behaviors. Okay, so when you see a woman and she's looking at you seductively and she strokes her breasts and maybe like puts her hand near her crotch,
well,
right?
we know what that means.
You know what is she saying? She's saying, I'm open.
Come hither, right?
Come here, come get me. Okay. When you see a man looking at you seductively and grabbing his junk, what's he saying?
Run.
Saying, I'm coming to get you. Right? Okay. And it's completely different. It's completely different how we perceive these things. This is why when a man, takes a piss in an alley and some woman sees him, that's considered a crime. It can get him on the sex offender registry. Whereas when a woman flashes a guy her tits at a party, right? It's not even considered a sexual transgression. Like he's not, even if he didn't want to see it, that's the last thing he wanted to see, right? For him to complain about that, because there's no threat in it, right? There's no inherent feeling or intuition of threat in her doing that, right? Whereas a man exposing himself that way, there's an implied threat no matter why he's doing it, right? And so I think that there are, and maybe all of these things, all of these adaptations are, have their source, their wellspring in uncertainty of paternity. And I think that there's a case to be made for that. But that doesn't mean that when a judge sees a woman crying, he's going to respond the same way that he would to a man crying. It's just not.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? It's not. Yeah. It's not going to fix it. It's maybe going to help, but I don't think it's going to fix it. And one thing that I think it's worth doing, if only to put women on notice that they can't do this to men, and absolve men of the responsibility for and notify them, right? Notify them.
Yeah, totally.
Woman is unreliable. Find another one who will be faithful so that you can actually have your own genetic progeny, and you can do it before you have raised 6 kids that were sired by another man, and now it's too late for you, right?
Yeah. Well, this has been a good discussion. The last question is the whole history of humanity is a story of self-domestication. How do we take our self-domestication to its most peaceful resolution? And that's you don't need to answer that if you don't want to. My thing is, this would be another step in the direction of humanity becoming more peaceful. I think we're lucky that we have all these intuitions of love. We're lucky that men invest in their children at all, evolutionarily. And I just wonder if we could do this we have the technology to do it. I wonder if we did do it, if that would be another step. It seems so much that feminists want men to be more like them. And I wonder if the reason, like the evolutionary reason behind why we aren't more like them, is this paternity uncertainty thing. And I think like taking that out of the environment, I wonder, as creatures of evolution, the environment is what shapes us. And I wonder if that little change in the environment could shape culture and us, maybe even biologically, over the course of time.
Well, here's the problem that I see with that is that
would you vote for this? Like, if somehow magically it could get on a ballot, would you vote for it?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Because
that really is the next step. I mean,
that would force women back to the table to actually bargain fairly with men.
Even getting it on the ballot would force a discussion.
Yeah.
This topic would, and I would, oh man, can you imagine our politicians debating this thing? This would be interesting.
Let's look at the expectations currently for men and women, right? Okay, so say I want a water feature in my backyard, and say I'm a normal woman and not the one who will go out with a pick and shovel and do it herself, because that's the woman that I am.
Good for you.
Say I've terraced a yard by hand. It wasn't fun.
It's not fun for us either. Just because you have a Y chromosome doesn't make it fun.
Digging out rocks bigger than your head, right? Enough of them to
totally.
build a rock wall. Yeah, no, not fun. But okay, so say I want a water feature, and I'm one of those women, right? One of those independent, strong, feminist women, like my friend who told me, when I was terracing my yard, you're doing it all wrong. You're supposed to rip a page out of the magazine, hand it to your husband, and say, make it look like this.
Oh my God.
And you ever hear the honey-do list?
Oh my God. Yes, I have. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, no, I want you to stain the deck, and I want you to repair the broken patio tile, and I want you to clean the gutters, and I want you to do this all on the weekend.
I am happily married, but I burned that honey-do list very early on.
Okay. But okay, look at it this way. When my mom, and this was like 30 years ago, right? My mom and dad have a very egalitarian relationship when it comes to division of power and decision making and things like that. But they have a very traditional relationship in terms of tasks, okay? Division of labor. And so my mom would go to a house party with their friends and stuff, and there's dinner, and it's like sort of a potluck, and she would go and dish out a plate for my dad, right? Mm-hmm. And bring it to him. And I do this for my boyfriend, my fiance as well, right? Dish out a plate and bring it to him. And her friends were so offended that she would do this, because you are not allowed. I mean, can you imagine if a man ripped
so wrong.
A page out of a culinary magazine, okay, and said, I want this for dinner tonight.
Oh my God.
Okay, and handed it to
World War III.
At the same time, if she's got a flat tire, you're not allowed to say, woman up and change your own tire. Oh my God. Okay. No, he's expected to do that. So it's like, we are not allowed to have expectations of women. So when it comes to this kind of thing, getting something like this, I'm wondering, okay, say we get the routine paternity testing on a ballot, we get it passed as a law, it is now the new normal, okay? Wouldn't feminists just come back with some kind of, what we already have actually? And, if he took on a fatherly role, which, could be something as simple as offering to pay for the abortion, right? Okay. That's an admission of responsibility, and that's taking on the role of the one responsible for the pregnancy, right? That means that we can still hold him accountable, even if he isn't the father, right? I mean, this is really, like I said, feminists will argue not for, would not argue for just for a woman to be able to absolve herself of responsibility to a child that was switched at birth or impregnated through a fertility clinic nurses, you know, malevolent actions, right?
Mm-hmm.
They wouldn't just argue for that. They would also argue for it to be her choice as to whether she wants to maintain rights over that child, right? Like you are not allowed to have an expectation that a woman do anything other than what she wants, right? And so,
but this is the battle of the sexes that's been going on since we were chimpanzees, right?
I've argued that that the more prosperous society is, the more money we have to spend on women, and the more safe society is, the more we are interested in protecting women, and that the more we can afford, the more we could afford to actually give compassion to men and see things from their point of view and really, you know, help and support them, the more we can afford to not do that and just give all of that good stuff to women, right? And so, you know, when we look at, and I'm looking at the problem with humanity sort of making this next step, right, is that humanity is not all on the same page, right? And
definitely not.
You know, and so when, you know, the West does not exist in a vacuum. And so these next steps that we take, even if we decide, right, that one of them is going to be mandatory paternity testing, the reason that I think that that would be beneficial is because it would actually force women to be honest with men. It would force women to reciprocate in terms of expectations, right? Like, I expect you to support my children, and you are allowed to expect me to give you children that are yours, right?
The environment has changed with birth control, and women in the feminist movement are like, slut shaming is really the only cultural adaptation to fight paternity uncertainty. So women are some women, not all women, obviously, but men have always had a fuck at anything that moves. Like we're calibrated for that, right? Now we're calibrating women for fuck everything that moves, and that seemed to happen in a very short period of time.
It's not working. It's not working. This is why you see the campus rape hysteria thing going on and all of that.
So you think women are not being calibrated for fuck everything that moves?
Well, they're being encouraged to do it, but I don't think that they're capable of handling it. I don't think evolutionary.
They have regretful sex, and that immediately is classified as rape.
Yes, and feminists are, again, they're trying to make women the supreme executive power in terms of that, right? In terms of defining, you know, a woman is allowed,
whether or not it's rape.
A woman is allowed to define an actual rape as perfectly fine if she's happy the next morning. Because, you know, oh my God, the captain of the football team totally raped me last night, and then he called me and he wants to continue to date, and I think he wants to marry me, and he really likes me, and I'm really happy, right? Yes. Even though it's technically rape, right?
What you're saying is blasphemy. I'm telling you, Karen. I can't believe you're saying this.
No, I actually have 2 videos called The Quandary.
You're committing the mortal sin here.
That the Quandary of Consent videos that I uploaded really detail the very murky and convoluted and confused relationship women have with the concept of contemporaneous consent to a sexual activity, right? Yeah. They believe that, and they want, I think women want, or they would like, to have the ability to go back in time and redefine a sexual encounter based on their feelings right now, right?
So they wanted that because of the pregnancy thing. They wanted that from the beginning of time.
Of course they have, and of course they should not have it, because
men cheat though. Men cheat though, and that there is some feminism has given men a whole host of tools that they can use to get women to have regretful sex.
They've laid the foundation for the pickup artist community to have
totally.
But here's the thing, right? When you actually set up, because rules and laws are there not just to punish people who do wrong, but they are there to put people on notice as to what behavior is
exactly,
what behavior is not. And when you actually set up a rule right? Or a set of laws where there is really no way to know what behavior is okay and what behavior is not, right?
That's called normlessness. That's called anomie. They have a word. Sociologists have a word for that. Yeah.
It's all the subjective perception of the alleged victim, the woman, right? Then what you have is a situation where now all of the power of the sexual contract lies in the hands of the woman, right? And the man is completely stripped of bargaining power. And you can punish him. Like feminists they've essentially said, okay, well, women are independent now and they have their own money and all of this, and they don't need men to support their kids. And okay, we can force them to support their kids if a kid happens, right? But okay, there's this sexual cartel, right, that wants to keep the price of sex high, right? The price of female sexuality must remain high. And you either make it so that men are paying for the sex through, all of the traditional ways of, paying for dinner and courtship and promising a lifetime of support and all of these things, right? Or you make them pay through punitive measures, and the woman gets nothing out of that. She doesn't benefit from that, but the man is still punished, so he's still paying, right? And that is, I think, why and that keeps the power, right, in that social contract in the hands of the woman, is the fact that she can make him pay one way or another for sticking his dick in her.
Yeah. Well, this has been a great conversation. Is that you? Feedback?
Oh, maybe. Yeah, I'll mute.
You don't have the headphones on? That's okay. I forgive you, especially since we're at the end.
All right. So, well, I don't wear the headphones ever because they are only sporadically working. So.
Oh, that's the worst. That is the worst feeling. But this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. SkepTorr had, I think, one good thing to say.
You had such a good dialogue. I didn't want to interrupt it.
No.
And I noticed that you wanted to keep this on topic and not,
just for the audience. I love to listen to streams, but when they drift off topic, I always feel I kind of lose interest a little bit. So sorry if I snapped at you during the conversation.
No, you'll pay for that later. I'll send the sound on your ass. But
I'm used to Allison dragging the conversation, kicking and screaming back on topic, and derailing the Karen train and all of those things. They actually say that, the Karen train.
Oh my goodness. So there is some precedent for what I did. Well, that's good to know.
Yeah. It's all good. Sometimes I do, and it is because the topic is so complex and interconnected. It
really is.
I have no fucking idea what I'm talking about in this topic. So that's why I brought in Karen, because a friend had wanted me to talk about the subject, and I have no fucking clue. So that's why we have Karen for.
Right.
So I'll stay on the line, SkepTorr, if you want to end the stream. Hey, thanks for everyone for listening.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.